I never thought a melody could become the last thread holding two hearts together. But that night, as the piano played softly in the corner of the dim hospital room, I finally understood how fragile love can feel when time begins to slip away. She lay there, barely strong enough to lift her eyelids, yet somehow still able to smile when the first notes drifted into the air. "Just one more time, our song," she whispered, her voice thin but filled with the same warmth that carried me through every hard season of our lives. I pulled the chair closer to her bedside and nodded, pretending I was strong enough to keep my voice steady. I wasn't. The pianist in the hallway must have recognized me, because without me saying a single word, he began playing that melody, the one we danced to in our tiny apartment when we were young, the one we played in the car during road trips, the one that filled the house the night I proposed to her in the kitchen. It was our story wrapped in sound. And as it floated into the room, something inside me shattered and held together all at the same time. She turned her head slightly toward me, slow and careful, like the movement required more effort than her body had left. Yet her eyes were full of a calm I couldn't understand. It was like she wasn't afraid anymore, like the music reminded her of all the days she had won, not the ones she had lost. I held her hand gently, hoping she couldn't feel how badly mine was shaking. Her fingers curled around mine, weak, but still hers. Still warm. Still here. The song continued, soft and familiar. Each note felt like it carried a memory, her laughter in the rain, her hand tucked inside my jacket on cold nights, the way she hummed this same melody while cooking, always off-key but always perfect. I could see all of it, flashing like a quiet slideshow behind my eyes. And for a moment, even though machines were beeping and nurses whispered outside the door, it felt like time slowed just so we could breathe in this last piece of peace together. Halfway through the melody, her fingers loosened just a little. I didn't panic, not yet. I just held tighter, pretending it was accidental, pretending she was just tired. But then her breathing softened, almost too gentle to hear. And before the next chord settled into the air, her hand became completely still. I called her name, softly, hoping she would squeeze my hand back the way she always did. She didn't. But the music didn't stop. It kept playing, filling the room, filling the space between life and loss. And I kept singing along, even though my voice cracked and tears slid down her fingers. I sang until the final note faded, because it was the only thing left I could give her. The music kept playing after she was gone. My name is Daniel, and I loved a girl whose smile could silence storms. Even before I understood what love really was, before I learned how fragile and temporary life can be, I knew there was something different about her. Her name was Lila, gentle, brave, and always humming the same tune under her breath as if her life had its own soundtrack. It didn't matter where she was, walking down a hallway, reading by the window, or waiting for the kettle to boil, that quiet melody followed her like a soft breeze. People noticed her for her kindness, for her calm way of speaking, but for me, it was that little tune that made her unforgettable. It was as though she carried music inside her long before she ever heard mine. We met in a tiny community music hall, the kind most people would walk past without realizing it was even open. It had chipped red paint on the doors, and old wooden chairs that squeaked whenever someone shifted their weight. But to me, that room was a sanctuary, a place where sound felt alive, where strangers sat close enough to share warmth, where every Thursday evening I would play the piano for whoever cared to listen. I didn't know it then, but every performance I ever played there would eventually lead me to her. She always sat in the front row, leaning slightly forward, eyes closed, hands resting loosely in her lap as if she wasn't just listening but absorbing each note into her bloodstream. Most people clap after a song ends, but not Lila. She would linger, keeping her eyes shut for a moment longer than everyone else, almost like she was letting the final chord fade inside her before opening them again. And when she did, she always looked straight at me. Not with the admiration of a fan, but with the gentleness of someone who sees the person behind the music. At first, I thought she was just a dedicated listener. Some people came every week, she simply happened to be one of them. But attendance alone couldn't explain the way she understood the emotion in every melody, even when I couldn't express it with words. Some nights, after a difficult day, my playing would be unsteady, or quiet, or heavy with thoughts I didn't know how to carry. And somehow, she noticed. Her smile afterward always matched the mood of the music, soft when it needed comfort, bright when it needed hope. One evening after I finished my final piece, I found her waiting near the piano, standing with her hands clasped behind her back. She rocked slightly on her heels, humming that familiar tune under her breath. When she realized I'd seen her, she smiled, that storm-silencing smile, and said, "You play like you're telling the truth." Not everyone does that. I didn't know how to respond. Compliments never meant much to me, but hers felt different. Honest. Gentle. Somehow deeper than the words themselves. So I just nodded, trying not to look as flustered as I felt, and she laughed quietly before stepping closer. "I don't want diamonds or promises," she told me. "Just play for me." At the time, I thought she simply liked music. I had no idea those words would become the foundation of our entire relationship. I didn't know how many nights we would spend sitting by the piano in my tiny apartment, her head resting on my shoulder while I played the soft melody she loved most. I didn't know how many storms we would weather together with nothing but a song between us. And I certainly didn't know how tightly those words would cling to my heart long after her voice fell silent. Looking back now, I realize that Lila never asked for much because she never needed much. She found happiness in simple things: warm tea, rainy mornings, worn-out books, and the sound of piano strings vibrating under tired fingers. Her love was quiet, steady, and patient. And without even trying, she taught me that the most beautiful parts of life are often the ones that don't make noise. If I had known how short our time would be, maybe I would have played more for her. Maybe I would have memorized every expression she made when a melody touched her heart. Maybe I would have taken those Thursday nights and stretched them into years. But I didn't know. I only knew that every time her eyes met mine from that front seat, I felt something shift inside me, something I didn't have the courage to name yet. What I do know is this: loving her changed everything. And even now, long after she's gone, every time I touch a piano key, it feels like I'm whispering her name. We built our entire love on music, almost as if the universe decided that sound would be the language we spoke best. There were days when words felt too small or too clumsy to hold what we felt, but a melody, even a simple one, could carry everything we couldn't say. Our first date wasn't some grand dinner or carefully planned event. It was just the two of us on a quiet rooftop, sitting on an old blanket with a beat-up speaker that kept cutting out every few minutes. The wind was louder than the music, and the city below hummed with life, but none of that mattered. Every time the speaker died, she'd nudge it gently with her foot, laugh, and say, "Maybe it's trying to save us from your terrible playlists." And every time it flickered back on, she would lean her head against my shoulder like it was the most natural place for her to be. That rooftop became our world. Not because it was beautiful, it wasn't, but because it was ours. She traced the constellations with her fingers, even though she never remembered their names, and I played her snippets of songs I hadn't finished yet. She always closed her eyes when listening, the same way she did in the hall the day I met her. I used to think she did that to focus, but later I learned she did it because she felt safe. The night air, the broken speaker, the soft hum of the city, it all blended with the rhythm of us beginning. Our first kiss was just as imperfect and just as magical. It happened at the exact moment the chorus of our favorite song kicked in, a song she insisted was destined to follow us forever. We were dancing in the living room of my tiny apartment, her socks sliding on the wooden floor as she tried to spin and nearly fell into me. The chorus rose, her laughter spilled into the air, and I kissed her before I even realized what I was doing. She froze for half a second, then melted into it, her hands finding their way to the back of my neck. When we pulled away, she whispered, "If you stop playing that song, I'll never forgive you." I didn't know then how true that promise would become. Every milestone, every joy, had a melody behind it. When she graduated from her nursing program, I wrote her a small piano piece with a bright, climbing tune that reminded me of the light in her eyes. When we moved into our first place together, we spent an entire evening dancing between stacks of boxes, choosing songs not based on genre but based on how they made us feel. Even our arguments had music. She'd storm off to the bedroom, but a moment later I'd hear her humming, and I'd take that as my cue to apologize first. Music wasn't just part of our lives, it was the glue holding every chapter together. But her illness came quietly, the way a shadow grows without you noticing until it's suddenly everywhere. At first it was just fatigue, little comments about feeling tired even after sleeping all night. Then she started wincing when she moved certain ways, brushing it off with a smile and saying she probably just overworked herself. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. We both did. But the pain got worse, and the hospital visits became too frequent to ignore. I remember the first night she stayed overnight at the hospital. I sat beside her bed, listening to the machines beep in inconsistent rhythms, every sound carving fear into my chest. She tried to make light of it, joking that the machines were attempting a remix of our favorite song. And even when the pain stole her breath, she kept humming that same gentle tune under her breath, as if music alone could calm the chaos inside her body. Through all of it, the tests, the silence in doctors' voices, the long nights where she trembled through the pain, she never asked for anything. Not comfort. Not reassurance. Not promises. Just that song. The one from our rooftop. The one from our first kiss. The one that had followed us through every moment that mattered. Play it for me, she would whisper, even when her voice was fading. And I did. Because it was the only thing I knew how to give when everything else was slipping out of my control. As the weeks passed, the hospital room stopped feeling like a place we visited and slowly became the world we lived in. The walls never changed. The curtains never changed. The soft, pale morning light that crept through the blinds never changed. But we did. I watched pieces of our old life fade away, replaced by the constant hum of machines that tried their best to keep rhythm, though they always sounded like broken instruments struggling through a song they didn't know how to play. Nurses walked in like shadows, gentle and careful, their footsteps always quieter than the weight of the news they carried. Doctors spoke in low voices, not because they wanted to hide the truth, but because sorrow has a way of making even good people whisper. Lila kept her courage, but I could see the fight in her eyes. Every breath she took seemed to ask for more strength than her body could offer. Her smile was still there, faint but real, yet it stretched thinner as time went on. Some days she could sit up, adjusting her hair and joking about hospital food, trying to keep things light for my sake. But other days even lifting her hand felt like a battle she wasn't sure she could win. I watched her fingers tremble when she reached for her cup. I watched her struggle to push herself up on the pillows. And every time she winced, every time she swallowed hard and tried to hide the pain, something inside me cracked a little more. But no matter how heavy the day was, no matter how many tears she fought or how tired she became, every single night she'd whisper the same thing, "Daniel, play it for me. Please." Her voice was always soft, more breath than sound, but it still carried all the memories we shared. And even when my voice cracked, even when grief sat in my throat like a stone, I played. I played that melody we built our love on, the rooftop song, the chorus of our first kiss song, the sound that followed us through laughter and storms. I played because it was the only way I knew how to hold her when my hands alone weren't enough. Sometimes she closed her eyes and the tension in her shoulders eased, as if the notes stitched her back together in ways medicine couldn't. Sometimes she hummed along, though her voice grew quieter with each passing week. And sometimes, when the pain was too much, she simply listened, breathing slow, holding my hand lightly, letting the music carry her where her body couldn't go. But that evening, something felt different from the moment I walked into the room. The air was too still, the light too dim, the machines too quiet. Lila was lying on her side, curled slightly, her hair spread across the pillow like a fading halo. When she turned her head toward me, her smile came late, not because she didn't want to, but because even smiling took effort she didn't have anymore. I sat beside her and took her hand, noticing immediately how cold it felt. She tried to squeeze my fingers the way she always did, but the pressure was barely there. Her breaths grew shallow, barely lifting her chest. Each inhale sounded like it was searching for strength that wasn't answering anymore. Her fingers trembled in mine, weak and unsteady, and I could feel the fear she tried so hard to hide. She didn't want to leave. She wasn't ready. And neither was I. I wanted to believe she would get better. I wanted to pretend the doctors were wrong or that miracles were real or that if I held her tight enough I could keep her here. But the truth pressed down on me like a cold hand around my heart. Time was slipping. I could feel it in the quiet between her breaths, in the fading warmth of her skin, in the way her eyes lingered on mine longer than usual, like she was memorizing me. She whispered my name once, barely audible. Then, with her lips trembling, she said it again, "Play it, one more time." And even though my hands were shaking, even though the world was blurring through my tears, I lifted the guitar, steadied my breath, and began to play, hoping the music could hold her here just a little longer, hoping love alone could fight the ticking clock neither of us could escape. She asked for the song again. Just one more time. She didn't even need to say the whole sentence anymore. I could hear it in the way her breath wavered, in the way her fingers gently nudged toward mine as if reaching for comfort she no longer had the strength to ask for out loud. But that night, she whispered it anyway, barely shaping the words with her lips. Just one more time. Her voice was weak, fragile, almost weightless, but her eyes were still full of love. Not fear, not regret, just love, stretched thin but still shining, still holding on even as the rest of her slipped away. I sat beside her, pulling the chair so close it scraped the floor. I didn't care. All I cared about was making sure she didn't feel alone. I took her hand, small, cold, trembling, and held it gently against my chest, right over my heartbeat. I wanted her to feel that she was still connected to something alive, something strong enough to hold both of us. I brushed a strand of hair away from her forehead, and she blinked slowly, looking at me the way she always did when she wanted to say more than her lungs would allow. So I began singing. The melody came out softer than I intended, almost like it was afraid to disturb the quiet of the room. The hospital lights overhead flickered just a little, casting a pale glow across her face. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind she only gave when she felt safe, when she knew she was exactly where she wanted to be. For a moment, just a small, fragile moment, it felt like time paused, letting us breathe inside a memory we didn't want to end. Halfway through the melody, her grip loosened. At first, I didn't understand. I thought maybe she was adjusting her fingers or shifting her hand. But then the tension slipped away completely, her fingers falling still against my palm. I froze. My voice caught, but I forced myself to keep going, even though my breath was shaking. I called her name softly, hoping her eyelids would flutter, hoping she'd squeeze my hand back the way she had so many times before. But her hand lay there, quiet and unmoving, as if all the strength she had left had simply drifted out of her. I felt my chest tighten, felt something inside me break so sharply it stole my next inhale. But I kept singing. I didn't stop, I couldn't. If I stopped, then the moment would shatter into reality, and I wasn't ready for that. So I sang through the pain spreading through my body, through the fear clawing at my throat. I sang even when my vision blurred, turning her face into a soft, trembling outline. Even when my voice cracked so hard the words came out uneven. Even when my hands shook so violently I almost dropped the guitar. My tears fell onto her fingers, one, then another, then more than I could count. They slid across her skin like tiny apologies, like tiny pleas begging her to stay. The room felt too quiet, too cold, too final, but the melody kept me moving, one note after another, as if the song itself refused to let go of her memory. I leaned closer, letting my forehead rest against the back of her still hand, letting the music hold both of us in a place where goodbye hadn't fully arrived yet. By the time I reached the final notes, my voice was barely even a whisper. The last chord trembled out of me, thin and broken, hanging in the air like a breath that didn't know where to land. I looked at her face, peaceful, still, untouched by pain for the first time in months, and I realized the truth I'd been trying to outrun: she wasn't just tired. She wasn't just resting. She was gone. The song ended, but the silence that followed it pressed into my chest like a weight I wasn't built to carry. And all I could do was hold her hand, my tears falling freely, wishing with every ounce of my heart that love could have pulled her back. But all I had left was the melody. And the memory of her whispering, "One more time." When the last chord faded, I realized the room was silent in a way I had never heard before. Not the gentle kind of silence that settles after a long day, not the comforting kind that wraps around two people who don't need words. This silence was different. It felt heavy, final, as if the walls themselves understood what had just happened and were holding their breath out of respect. My voice drifted off into nothing, and for a moment I couldn't even hear my own heartbeat. I didn't want to lift my eyes. I didn't want to face the stillness resting on her face. But I felt movement behind me, soft, hesitant, almost reverent. I finally looked up, turning just enough to see the doorway. The nurses were standing there, motionless except for the tears slipping down their cheeks. One held her hand over her mouth, trying not to make a sound. Another wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, her shoulders shaking. And in that moment, it hit me that they hadn't just stepped in after hearing the machines change. They had been there. Listening. They knew the song. Every night for weeks, they had heard me play it, sometimes strong, sometimes breaking, sometimes barely more than a whisper while I tried to hold myself together. They had walked past the room with their charts and clipboards, hearing the same melody drift through the hallway like a fragile prayer. They had paused in the doorway when Lila's voice was too weak to sing along, watching her close her eyes and let the music soften her pain. These women, strangers, really, had witnessed our love in the simplest and most vulnerable form. And they had watched her smile through the pain. That thought alone cracked something open inside me. I wasn't the only one who saw how brave she was. I wasn't the only one who noticed how she fought silently, how she tried to keep her gentleness even when her body betrayed her. The nurses had seen it too. They had watched her hold on, not for herself, but for moments like this, moments where love meant more than medicine ever could. One of them, a woman with silver-rimmed glasses and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, stepped forward. She didn't rush, didn't try to fix anything, didn't offer those empty phrases people say when they don't know what else to give. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch light but steady, and whispered, "She waited for you. She wanted this moment with you." And somehow, that gave me strength. The words didn't erase the pain. They didn't stop the ache spreading in my chest or lift the weight pressing down on my lungs. But they gave shape to something I hadn't been able to understand. Lila wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. She had held on, through the shaking hands, the shallow breaths, the endless nights, because she wanted to hear that song one last time. She wanted to leave this world with the melody that carried her through the best years of her life. She wanted me there, singing to her, holding her hand, loving her the same way I always had. A strange calm began to wash over me, slow and unfamiliar, like warm water seeping into a place that had been frozen for too long. I looked at her again, not at the stillness, not at the loss, but at the person she had been. The girl who hummed under her breath. The woman who laughed on a rooftop with a broken speaker. The fighter who asked for nothing except a little more music. I brushed my thumb gently along her knuckles and felt gratitude rise through the grief, fragile but real. The nurse squeezed my shoulder once more before stepping back, giving me space. No one said anything else. They didn't need to. Their presence, their tears, their quiet understanding, it was enough. It made the room feel less like a place of endings and more like a place where love had done one final, beautiful thing. And even though my heart was breaking, her final gift to me, that moment, that whisper, that choice, became the first tiny spark of strength I had felt in days. She waited for me. And somehow, knowing that helped me breathe again. The days after were heavy in a way I didn't know a person could feel. Not the kind of heaviness that makes you tired, not the kind that rests on your shoulders. This was different. It settled in my chest, slow and suffocating, like a silence that grew thicker each hour she wasn't there. I woke up expecting to hear her soft humming drifting from the kitchen, only to remember she would never hum again. I reached for my phone to text her things I used to say without thinking, and then the realization would strike all over again: she wasn't on the other end of anything anymore. Her absence felt like a missing note, one that made every melody incomplete, every room too quiet, every breath too sharp. People tried to comfort me. They brought food, sent messages, told me she was in a better place, said time would heal. I knew they meant well, but grief changes the language of the world. Their words slid past me like distant echoes, too soft to reach where the pain sat. I didn't want healing. I didn't want moving on. I wanted her. I wanted one more smile, one more laugh, one more moment where her fingers curled around mine. But wanting doesn't bring back what love has already let go. So I held on to the promise I made her, even though the promise hurt. I went back to the community music hall a week after the funeral. The place hadn't changed. The chipped red doors were still chipped, the chairs still squeaked, the air still carried a faint smell of old wood and dust. It felt strange stepping inside alone, without her presence lighting up the room just by existing. I sat at the piano, our piano, the one from the first night she heard me play, the one she always said made my emotions sound louder than my voice ever could. I placed my hands on the keys, and for a moment I couldn't move. The memories came so fast they blurred together. Her sitting in the front row with her eyes closed, her leaning against my shoulder on that rooftop, her spinning clumsily in our living room, her whispering for the song one more time. Every version of her seemed to appear beside me, just for a heartbeat, before dissolving in the quiet of the hall. I didn't intend to play. I thought I was too broken, too hollow. But then I remembered the way she looked at me that final night, the trust, the love, the gentle plea hidden in her fading breath. And before I even realized what I was doing, my fingers pressed the first keys of our song. The sound echoed through the empty hall, soft and familiar. It wrapped around me like a memory, like a whisper from a place I couldn't reach anymore. I closed my eyes and let the melody guide me. I played it the way I played for her every night in that hospital room, not perfectly, not powerfully, but honestly. Each chord felt like a conversation between my hands and my heart, each note like a step through the grief I didn't know how to carry. It didn't feel like healing. Not yet. But it felt like connection, a thin thread tying me back to her, reminding me that love doesn't disappear just because a life ends. When the final notes settled into the air, I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet shape itself around me until it felt less like loss and more like remembrance. And so began the tradition that has carried me through every year since. Every year on her birthday, I returned to that same piano, the one from the hall where we met, the one that held the beginning of our story. I sit on the same worn bench, place my fingers on the familiar keys, and play our song. The same tune she loved. The same melody she held onto until her last breath. Sometimes the notes come out steady, sometimes shaky. Sometimes I cry, sometimes I smile. But I always play it, because it's the one promise I know how to keep. And in that quiet room, on that old piano, for a few moments every year, I feel her beside me again, humming softly under her breath, eyes closed, her smile silencing every storm inside my heart. I used to think love ends when a heart stops. It felt like the most logical truth in the world. When someone's gone, the love you shared should fade with them, slipping into memory and eventually softening into something quiet and distant. But hers didn't. Even after the machines went still, even after the room emptied and the world kept spinning without her, I could still feel her in places I didn't expect. In the way morning light stretched across the floor. In the soft hum of the wind brushing past my window. In the silence that followed me like a familiar shadow. It was as if love, real love, refused to die with her. It simply changed shape. Because the song never ended. It lived on, not just as notes and chords, but as the imprint of her presence on everything it touched. When I played it, I could hear her laughter wrapped in its rhythm, bright and unfiltered, the kind of laughter that always filled our tiny apartment with warmth. I could feel her courage echoing in every note, the courage she carried through all those hospital nights when pain tried to take everything from her but never succeeded in taking her tenderness. I could sense her strength in the rise and fall of the melody, in the softness of its quietest moments, in the memories it stirred each time my fingers touched the keys. And every time I played it, I felt her hand in mine again. Not physically, not the way I used to hold her fingers between my own when she needed comfort or when she fell asleep beside me. But in a deeper, quieter way, a warmth filling the space inside me, a presence that made the air feel less empty, a reminder that she didn't leave to disappear. She left to become part of something that moves with me through every day I continue breathing. Her love didn't vanish. It folded itself into the music we built together, into the song she held onto until her last breath. Sometimes, when the grief comes suddenly, like a wave I didn't see coming, I sit at the piano not to escape the pain, but to give it a place to go. The music steadies me, guides me, reminds me that love's echoes can be louder than loss when we let them be. I used to fear that the song would break me someday, that playing it would reopen wounds that barely healed. But the truth is, it does the opposite. It pieces me back together, every time, note by note. Maybe that's the strange thing about love, it finds ways to keep singing, even when we can't. It rises where silence tries to settle. It breathes where sadness tries to suffocate. It lingers in the most unexpected corners of our lives, waiting to remind us that what we shared was too deep to vanish, too strong to crumble, too meaningful to be erased by something as fragile as time. Love like ours doesn't end. It just changes form, taking on new voices, new rhythms, new ways of being felt. Now, when I sit at that old piano in the hall where our story began, I don't just play for her, I play with her. Her laughter, her bravery, her light, they weave themselves into the melody as naturally as they once wove themselves into my days. And as the last note lingers in the air, I close my eyes and imagine her humming beside me, her smile soft and steady, her spirit resting gently in the music we made. If this story touched your heart, leave a red heart in the comments. Would you be able to keep playing the song, even after losing someone you loved? It's a question I ask because I never knew my own answer until life forced me to learn it. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories where love breaks, heals, and stays, even when life doesn't, subscribe. Sometimes the most painful stories are the ones that remind us how deeply we're capable of loving, and how beautifully love refuses to let go.